Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ashley Savoie and I will be your host as we dive into the world of cloud security. I'd like to welcome our speakers Frank and Gavin, who are going to give you an in-depth look at how you can apply the AWS Shared Responsibility Model to effectively manage risk. Plus, they're also going to explore what cloud operations means to you, as well as how working with a validated cloud operations competency partner can give you greater peace of mind. But first, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. Please post your questions in the Q&A session, section. And of course, we encourage you to keep our chat lively. Feel free to share insights from your own experiences or just let us know where you're joining from. That's all from me, and I'm going to hand it over to Frank to kick us off.
Thank you, Ashley, and nice to see or meet everybody here. Thanks for inviting me to present with you guys. It's always a pleasure to work with you guys at Trend, and I'm here to essentially exactly what you said, Ashley, to kind of set the context a little bit on cloud operations and how cloud operations is extremely vital for getting your security posture right. So let me see if I can change the slides. Let's start with our Cloud Ops model. So the Cloud Ops model, as you may have seen before, was ideated by one of our VP of engineering at AWS, and in the grand scheme, it basically says, you know, the best services and features don't mean anything if you can't operate them well, and you can't operate them securely, and you can't operate them at scale. And this is essentially the way that we look at this from a chronological and from a services perspective, where right in the beginning, before you start anything, you basically have to set the governance and the guardrails, right? You basically set the controls for anything that you're migrating into the cloud. Then you start building your workloads, you build your applications, you migrate your existing workloads into the cloud, building that infrastructure as code and security and resilience in there, and then eventually you operate those workloads with observability features, because as you probably know or have heard before, you know, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. So the operation part is going to be extremely important to getting that security right. We also align our services in this way. So when you look at our governance tools like Control Tower or Config or those things, they all fall into the setup and governance section. Then you have all of our migration and code tools like, you know, code commit, code deploy, CloudFormation, all those kind of things. And then on the operate side, you know, systems manager is a huge one that we recommend for our customers to use. And then of course our observability suite. But AWS always works from the customer in. So what we've basically looked at is how customers see this world and how they procure services, and how like what kind of buckets of needs do they have across this cloud operational model. And these 5 solution areas all comprise of, or cloud operations comprises of these 5 solution areas for cloud governance, financial management, observability, compliance, and ops management, which is essentially ticketing and centralized operations. And what we've seen at AWS is that the customers that get the highest return of investment for their investment in cloud operations are the customers that approach this into an integrated way. So you don't want to be the customer that has a state-of-the-art observability platform but forgets about cost control or governance, or you know, in the worst case, about compliance. So these operational models should be an integrated approach. And what Gavin is going to talk about later is also how this all fits together, right? How this use case that we're talking about today really touches on most of these 5 solution areas, and how customers can establish this overall cloud operational model. I would encourage you to scan the Forrester code here on the top. This is a study that we've commissioned that kind of drills down on this 241% ROI. It's really interesting, and it's really interesting how getting an effective cloud operational model is not just for peace of mind. It actually impacts your top line and your bottom line. And that report goes into it. That's really interesting. So what is covered in these areas? So what we've done at AWS, we've basically looked at each individual solution area, and we broke it down by use case. So each of these use cases here that you see on the screen, you might have struggled with some of them yourself. And what we do is we come together, we listen to our customers, how you are facing these issues, or what you are trying to accomplish in your cloud environment. And then we define best practices from the AWS world. We see what's out there, what kind of solutions are out there, what kind of partner solutions are out there, like Trend, and how do we map them to these individual use cases. And for our competency partners, we basically look at the offerings that our partners bring to market, and we compare it to what we think in AWS the best practice should be. And if our partners are kind of hitting the right notes and their solutions fit the bill on what our customers need, we validate you for the competency. And Trend is a validated competency partner. That's why I'm here as a competency leader, and that's why I love working with you guys here. But yeah, we could zoom in on any of these use cases here below, but I will let Gavin talk a little bit about some of these as well. So what makes a difference to choosing a competency partner for you as a customer, right? And this might be the first time that you heard about what a competency is. It's essentially a stamp of approval from AWS for very specific partners. And that stamp of approval only is given if you jump through all of the hoops that I just showed on the previous slide, where we make sure that they hit all of the right notes and best practices. And in return, these competency partners get special access. So you don't have to go just through the validation, but you will also get access to a set of, like a team of business development, but also technical experts to help you out, get special training. So all of the Trend guys are always invited to these invite-only trainings. So whoever you're working with at Trend has a really in-depth knowledge of our services, and not just about our current services, but also about the future services. So reInvent is around the corner. There's a ton of releases that we're going to do at reInvent. And I can guarantee you that Trend has been on calls with our internal services teams and knows what's happening in end of November, and make sure that the solution that Trend brings to market actually is ready for these new updates. So kind of looking around the corner there is super important, and that's what we like to do with our competency partners. But yeah, I'm not going to spin more my ads on the competency. I'm super happy that I'm here with the Trend guys. And Gavin, I pass it over to you here.
Thank you very much, Frank. Appreciate that. Thank you everybody for joining today. So to kind of dovetail into what Frank has been discussing just now, I'm going to talk around how to apply this shared responsibility model to effectively manage your risk within your environment. And throughout this, I'm going to talk about some anecdotes about where Trend worked with AWS to help provide that security around your AWS environment as well. So just to give you an idea of my agenda for the next 20 minutes or so, the first bit I'm going to discuss actually is what is the shared responsibility model. Something I have a lot of conversations with our customers about, because one, some customers aren't even aware of the model, and two, customers don't actually know what they need to do to provide the correct security practice within their AWS environment. The next section is around understanding and applying those security controls. I then talk about the impact of compliance and regulation. So actually, what is that impact? In terms of making sure you have the right security controls, but what does it do from your compliance and regulation perspective? Then, of course, the risk of not applying security controls, and then I'm going to wrap up with where Trend and AWS work really well together as well. So the first section, ultimately, what is that AWS shared responsibility model? Well, effectively it's split between two sections. So I'll start on the AWS side, and ultimately, this is where the responsibility of AWS sits to security of the cloud. So the security of the cloud, and the customer has responsibility for security in the cloud. So the AWS side of things is actually securing the back-end infrastructure of AWS. So that would be things like the software, the compute, the data centers, the storage, the database, networking, all of the hardware and global infrastructure. So things like the regions, availability zones, the edge locations. So if you think about the data centers that are all over the world, the physical security on those, making sure that those centers and all of the compute and storage and hardware is all secure within there. And ultimately, that's where AWS's responsibility stops. It's making sure the security of the cloud is secure. As a customer, whatever you put onto that AWS environment, from the platform, applications, operating system, network and firewall configuration, very importantly, your customer's data. So if you're running a service and you have customer data running through that, any of your encryption, any of your server-side encryption, any network traffic protection, that is all the responsibility of the customer. And I may be kind of preaching to converted on this one, but I have a lot of conversations with customers that don't actually realize that they have a large responsibility to make sure that their AWS environment is secure. They believe often that they're buying a service from AWS and whatever they put on there is secure, but that's not the case. You have to, as a customer of AWS, using these tools, you have to decide what security tools you use, what processes you use, what planning you put in place. And this is hugely important. I've seen quite a lot of scenarios where I've had to convert customers to make sure that they have the right awareness on this. So the next section I really wanted to discuss was around understanding and applying their security controls as well. So as a customer, you need to understand where your responsibilities are. And the AWS Shared Responsibility Model effectively divides those responsibilities between AWS and the customer. So remember that piece around that underlying infrastructure and where your responsibility fits as a customer on that data and applications and operating system. Defining those security requirements is super important. So before you actually start using AWS, you need to define where the security controls are going to sit. So, are you going to have a centralized management in your internal infrastructure? Are you going to have that centralized management in your AWS infrastructure? How are you going to look around at identifying your assets? How are you going to look around at assessing your risks? And also, how are you going to understand about mitigating any security breaches or any security risks that you see as well? And choosing security tools as early as possible to effectively bake in the controls. This is a conversation I've had many a times. We see customers adopting AWS, which is absolutely fantastic. And one of the pieces of advice we give is have those security discussions as early in your DevOps and lifecycle as possible. The reason being is it's a lot easier to understand what your security requirements are if you're getting those tools in first. We've seen many customers that have built their AWS environments and thought about security as an afterthought. And what we actually encourage is have it as part of that early development cycle, so you ultimately can have the most robust and secure environment as possible. And ultimately, this approach, what it helps is it actually helps to reduce your overall security risk and also improve your compliance posture as well. Some of the most common security breaches we see within the AWS environment is down to misconfiguration of cloud security controls. Not the environment itself, actually what security controls are being put on place and what the configuration is. And often we see those misconfigurations because security has been an afterthought. So again, just to kind of reiterate that point about baking in those controls, it's really quite important. And to touch on some of the components that Frank mentioned, security operability and visibility of your security, this is why it's so important to get those controls in very early. One thing I wanted to really discuss as well was around the impact of compliance and regulation. So compliance and regulations have been around since the dawn of time. It's never really changed from that perspective. But what has changed in the last 5 to 6 years is the regularity about how often we are seeing breaches that have resulted in quite heavy fines. They've resulted in lawsuits, etc. And ultimately, this is down to the fact that compliance regulations have definitely become much more tighter in the last 5 or 6 years. So some of these things that actually affect that. So the first one, is around increased security costs. So if you're having additional products and services required to secure your environment, this is going to lead to increased security costs. And this is because, effectively customers and companies have to ultimately purchase additional security tools to secure those infrastructures, because when adopting AWS, you need to think of every potential risk, every potential hole that could be breached on that environment as well. Another area you have there is around increased complexity. So integrating controls with existing systems, that could ultimately, again, increase the cost of your security, but also increase your complexity. So something we talk about at Trend Micro is very much around a platform play, a platform solution that you can ultimately put across your environment. When we're seeing increased complexity is when, going back to my previous slide, customers are looking at AWS and are thinking about security as an afterthought. What happens then is you're trying to put pieces of the puzzle together, and if they're from different vendors, different security tools to do point solutions, that's where the increased complexity comes along, and obviously also the increased cost as well. The other area that you get around that impact of compliance regulations is increased risk. Unfamiliar controls and changes ultimately can lead to the increase of risk of security breaches. I've seen this very, very commonly in areas such as healthcare, such as government and legal departments, where they have historical infrastructure that cannot be changed. And ultimately, they're trying to put security over the top of it, as well as having a hybrid environment. Maybe they're adopting AWS as part of a new project, but they still have to have their physical environment. You can ultimately have unfamiliar controls between the two, and that can lead to that increased risk. So what are the risks of not applying security controls? Well, first and foremost, the most obvious one, right, is data breaches. I spoke a moment ago around misconfiguration of cloud environments leading to data breaches. If that data is not secured properly, it ultimately can be exposed to unauthorized access, disclosure of information, disruption of tool sets, and that data breach is effectively what everyone is trying to avoid. Unfortunately, data breaches do happen. They happen to the best of us. They happen to organizations that actually have every security control you can think of. But ultimately, they as long as they are making sure that they are understanding their risk and understanding where those breaches can happen and how they can remediate that, that's what having those security controls in place. So if a breach does happen, they know what to do from that point as well. The next one obviously is financial losses, right? So if security controls are not in place, you get breached, you will suffer financial losses. This could be from cost of investigating the breach, notifying affected customers, and also recovering lost data. That's all going to be a financial loss from that space as well. Of course, regulatory fines. If you're familiar with, for example, EMEA in Europe with GDPR, if you get breached, you have a percentage of your annual turnover is part of that fine, right? And these are in the hundreds of millions of pounds in some instances. So regulatory fines are absolutely a huge risk of not applying those security controls. Brand reputation, it doesn't help anybody if as a business, your reputation is potentially damaged by a breach, and effectively, the loss of customers can result in that as well. And of course, legal liability, that final one, any data breach can lead to legal liability, especially if there's user data involved within that breach of the information that comes out of there as well. We have lots of user cases where we have seen various breaches, and they happen on a very, very regular scenario. And actually, it often comes down to, at the end of the day, what security controls are in place. So if a breach happens, how are they defending against that? So Trend and AWS, where do we fit together? Well, effectively, Trend fully integrates into an AWS environment. So within that DevOps lifecycle, whether it's looking at development pipelines, looking at your AWS cloud accounts, looking at your cloud storage, we effectively can help provide security tools on that layer. And we embed throughout that DevOps lifecycle, and actually it's providing the right security controls at the right time and giving the right people the right information. We're very aware, with the DevOps lifecycle, there's many people involved, many different teams who would be doing different functionality within that space. So ultimately, making sure the right people have the right information about potential risks or potential breaches within that environment as well. And where Trend actually wraps our tools into this, looking not just at the known threats, but looking at things like the unknown threats. So zero-day attacks that can happen within an environment, which can often be from the result of software vulnerabilities that may not be patched. So Trend look at that. We look at those vulnerabilities. We apply tool sets and IPS rules over those vulnerabilities. Looking at things like file-based threats as well. So what I would consider maybe a bit more traditional-based attacks. Looking at network threats. That can definitely not be ruled out. Even at AWS, there's network traffic going through that, and we have tool sets that can help secure that network traffic within AWS as well. I talked around cloud misconfiguration, but those cloud service misconfigurations, we have the ability to help you improve your posture on your cloud security as well. And ultimately, those looking at things like suspicious changes. But the whole piece of this as well is touching back onto what Frank mentioned around compliance. What Trend is really puts our tool set around. We first of all look at that compliance piece. We look at resource and application discovery, so understanding where your resources are, understanding where your applications are, understanding the risks of those, and actually defining that. Then looking at things like detection and response. So if a potential risk or breach is happening, are we able to detect that? Are we able to respond to it and protect it? And very importantly, are we able to remediate that? And Trend absolutely can do that entire lifecycle piece as well. I've got a couple of use case scenarios I want to, or kind of stories I want to tell you about. The first one is a US healthcare provider. Can't reveal who they are due to disclosure and confidentiality. But ultimately, this customer was subject to a breach. They had a lot of security risks in their environment, a lot of unpatched environments, legacy environment was in there as well. So using a hybrid environment, so to speak. They just recently started to adopt AWS, and effectively they had a breach on their environment, which is from their legacy environment. They got the breach, and it started to leak into their AWS environment. And ultimately they had to replace their existing tools because they were not viable for what they needed. And in this scenario, this customer actually looked at quite a few vendors on the market. I think they had 5 in total, Trend being one of those. And they actually chose Trend mainly for our security portfolio in the cloud, the ability actually to enhance their visibility. So even when they're secure, they want to have a really nice snapshot view at any point in time to understand a real-time snapshot view, understand exactly what their visibility and of their risk was in their environment, and also have control over those sensitive assets. And what actually helped them with was to automate their compliance with their regulations. Healthcare has a very strict kind of compliance and regulation procedures, and with their Trend micro solutions, they were able to automate that and make sure that they were secure from at any point in time. The second one of the two I want to talk about was actually one in Europe, and ultimately this is a customer who they're actually a dairy group, so they make dairy products in Ireland, which is very famous for its dairy products. And ultimately, you think, well, what does a dairy product need? company need with cybersecurity? Well, ultimately, quite a lot, as it seems. This company is one of the largest distributors in the world of dairy products like butter, margarines, cheeses, etc. And ultimately, they were having a lot of potential attacks hitting their environment. And what they decided to do was actually to revisit their security tool set and understand they needed somebody that could help keep them safe 24/7. And Trend Micro was the one they chose for that. Again, a customer that has adopted AWS and ultimately has automated workloads depending on their environment, and those Trend Micro tool sets which are wrapped into that as well. The final piece I wanted to discuss was around Trend as a whole, right? So I've talked a lot today about AWS and Trend securing cloud environments and posture management and looking at compliance and regulations. Trend isn't just about cloud. Cloud is a huge part of our portfolio, but actually where it starts around with Trend is around attack surface risk management, known as ASRM. And what this is about actually is looking at discovering attack surface wherever that sits. So if that is in your cloud environment, if it's on your physical environment, if it's on your network, if it's on your email, if it's on your endpoint devices or your mobile devices, we're looking at discovering that attack surface. We're then looking at assessing the risk on that surface, and then we're looking at mitigating the risk. So ultimately, it's a whole continuous life cycle of looking for potential flaws in your environment and basically assessing those and fixing those flaws. We have wrapped underneath that is something called zero trust architecture. So what we call is never trust, always verify. That's effectively the slogan for that, in the sense that if you have devices, cloud accounts, users trying to connect to your network that aren't actually part of your network, it's very hard to understand when that's happening and to secure it from potential malicious activity. So zero trust architecture is kind of underpinning our entire portfolio to make sure that only the correct people get access into your environment to the data, with the correct people to the data that they need as well. We then have a whole area around extended detection and response. This is looking at threats again across those vectors there. So from user identity to email to endpoint, right way through to operational technology as well. We effectively have a platform that can detect against threats. So it will protect against those threats by detecting them. It will respond. It will then remediate as well. Our 5 kind of pillars, our main areas that we cover. So I mentioned cloud security already, but the other ones is email security, endpoint, network security, and operational technology security as well. So things like factories and industrialized environments as well. We then have a very heavy stance on orchestration and automation. So having all these security tools is great, but actually what we need is the ability to have automation on that security. So populating the right security controls, the IPS rule sets that are going into your environment, making sure that your environment is secure. That orchestration piece is really key for that, making sure so you effectively as an end user would orchestrate to say, right, this is what we need to do. The automation tool set then runs in a back end based upon that orchestration. We then have a whole bunch of areas around managed services. So all of this can be provided as a managed service from Trend Micro as well. So we can work with partners, we work with AWS, we work with yourselves as customers to provide a managed service of security across that piece. We then have a huge ecosystem integration. Of course, AWS is a huge part of that. Trend Micro have been working with AWS for many years, long before I joined Trend. And in fact, Trend were one of the first to actually secure AWS workloads and be available within the AWS marketplace as well. And then really important part is underpinning all of this, right? Our global threat intelligence, it's second to none. It very much is world leading global threat intelligence. We have areas in there around our attack surface intelligence. We have something called Zero Day Initiative. I urge you to go and look up that online. Ultimately, this is looking at unknown vulnerabilities. We discover those, and effectively we then create the correct rule set to protect against those as well. last year alone, Trend Micro discovered 64% of all global unknown vulnerabilities. That's a huge portion. That's 2/3 of all unknown vulnerabilities in the world were discovered by Trend Micro. The reason for that is we have a vast army of white hat researchers that go out and effectively look for these vulnerabilities. We then apply the correct security roles for our customers. So if, for example, a common one of these is legacy environments, right? If you have a legacy environment that hasn't got a correct patch on it, and the vulnerability comes out and it hasn't got a patch available for that vulnerability, we will create the correct rule, IPS rule set to secure that vulnerability. Of course, things like our threat research, our AI and machine learning all comes part of that as well. And then we have a whole platform foundation that underpins that. So we have multi-tenancy available, we have role-based access control, single sign-on, the things you would expect from a platform as of this. And ultimately this wraps into a single interface that you can secure your infrastructure with. AWS, as I mentioned, is a huge part of this. It effectively helps Trend position where we're going as well with our tool set. But ultimately, if you are an AWS customer and you're looking to secure those environments, Trend Micro is a good place for that. So with that, I think that's the end of what I need to talk to you about today. I'm going to hand it back over to Ashley.
Thank you so much, Gavin and Frank, for taking the time to share your knowledge with us today. It was really great to get back to the fundamentals of the shared responsibility model and cloud operations so we can better understand how we can drive security outcomes. I did want to take a quick moment before we sign off today to let you know that we do have a free 30-day full access trial of Trend Vision One available to you today. So you can jump right in and see how our cybersecurity platform can help you reach your cloud security goals. I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and we hope you gained some valuable insight, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Ashley.